Hey, Foot Clan, we have a great show for you today, the top 10 wide receiver rankings. Before we get into it, I want to remind you about the Ultimate Draft Kit. The Ultimate Draft Kit is the #1 tool to dominate your 2019 fantasy draft. We have all the 2019 stat projections in there. We have 100-plus player profile videos. We got custom league scoring coming this year. Reception perception content, our top 200 list, risk ratings, and so much more. You can learn more about it and when everything releases at ultimatedraftkit.com.
This is D.D. Westbrook here with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and you're listening to the Fantasy Footballers Podcast.
Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers Podcast, coming to you from pristineauction.com studios with your hosts, Andy Holloway, Jason Moore, and Mike Wright.
Welcome in. Excited to be here. Excited to be with all of you. Jason is here.
I am excited to be with one of you here.
Oh, okay.
I'm not saying who.
Oh, okay.
I'm not saying who, but one of you I am just thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here with you. The other one, maybe I am. Maybe not. I don't know.
Mike Wright is here, the fantasy hitman, wearing the hat. It's hat week.
It's hat. Well, half of a hat week. Getting the hair trimmed up tomorrow. I just had the brainstorm while I was listening to the intro music to our podcast, which is sensational.
Yeah, you made that.
Thank you for pointing that out. But I mean, with March Madness and everything going on, I know that there are people out there listening to this show who are the leaders of marching bands and pit bands. How has no one arranged the theme song for the fantasy footballers for a marching band?
Like on a field?
Yes.
Like at a random high school game?
Yes.
Yeah, I have no idea why they haven't done that.
Hey, you want to get in the listener league, you send that footage of your marching band playing the fantasy footballers theme song in the key of E, please.
Okay.
And you'll get in.
Congrats to the championship team, by the way, from the big game.
Oh, who cares?
Well, it's Tuesday.
Who was it? Who's in?
You don't know who's playing in the championship game?
I heard something terrible happened to Auburn.
Well, Auburn's out. Yeah, Virginia
won.
And then Texas Tech.
They won it all. That's what I've heard. I've heard the Virginia won.
We may or may not be recording this show at about 3 in the afternoon on Monday, April 8th. You're listening to it on Tuesday, April 9th after Virginia won the big game. All right. Hey, here's a quick question for the show today. By the way, I said it in the intro. It's a huge show. We've got our early top 10 wide receiver rankings. It's so exciting to get into these. Last week we did running backs. Today we're going to share our consensus top 10 at this point in the season or in the preseason. But first, a quick question. Guys, how do you sort through all of the offseason coach speak?
Ooh.
All of the, the hype trains coming in. The reporters are talking. Everybody looks great. What matters to you from the news? I mean, we're going to report lots of hype. What matters the most?
I prefer that coach speak fits my narrative and what I want them to say about players that I like.
Oh, so if they're on your roster, if it's somebody you've liked for multiple years.
Yes.
Those are the truest.
My number one
truthiest.
My number one method for cutting through coach speak is to compare it to what the team's actions are and see if they line up. Like, a couple months ago, Jordan Howard was being talked up as, he's a part of our plans. He's going to be the lead ball carrier, and they're bringing in, Benny Snell for private interviews. Then they sign Mike Davis, and you're going, Jordan Howard is not going to be part of their plans. And so you got to compare what's being said because they don't, they're always talking everyone up. But what are they doing with their money? Are they spending it on people, on resources, their time and their money? That's what I try to pay the most attention to.
And if they say something bad about a player.
Those you should really pay.
That's not me being facetious. If they're talking poorly about a player, there's a reason for that because right now everybody is the best and everybody is great.
Also, everybody's injury, super ahead of schedule.
Yes.
I mean, they are so far ahead, it's going Great.
Why do we have schedules anymore?
Well, to speak to the Jordan Howard situation, Matt Nagy said, yeah, there's a role for Jordan Howard, but we're listening. I mean, that was like the news before the trade. That was not all roses. That was not he's going to be here.
But you don't generally say that about players that are really have a role on your team.
That's what I mean. You got to pay attention to anything that's not super positive.
Agreed.
All right. Hey, follow us on Instagram, instagram.com/fantasyfootballers. The website is thefantasyfootballers.com. Hot off the press, gentlemen. Couple of great articles. The Commissioner's Guide to 2019 League Adjustments, written by Michael Weinrich. And then a brand new article from a brand new writer, Lauren Carpenter, just published a David Johnson top 5 RB discount article.
Yeah.
Check that out on the
Making
website.
the case for DJ.
Congrats to our 6 new writers, by the
Yes.
way, who joined the team. Going to have some great content on the website because I know if you're listening here in April, you probably can't get enough fantasy football. So we understand.
Because there's not enough.
That's why this show exists. So no news today. Just a reminder, check out the Sleeper app. You'll get breaking news on the Sleeper app. You can load your league in there, switch to the Sleeper platform for your Dynasty League. And without further ado, we're going to jump right in because I want time to talk about these guys. Ready to rumble?
Yes.
Wide receivers.
All right. We've put together our lists here in April because it is not quite May or June.
It's not what?
It's gonna be me.
Yes, Brooks! Yes! Yes!
You know what's funny is now that we're multiple years of Justin
It's gonna be me.
Timberlake trolling me, I get these these messages start up 3-4 weeks ago. I started getting them on Twitter. Anytime anybody is they're probably penciling in their calendar, their home calendar.
Can't wait.
And as soon as something from their life touches the month of May, I get it. They tweet me.
The month of what?
It's gonna be me.
What's great, I don't know if you've seen, Timberlake is well aware of what is going on with the memes, and he just owns it because how awesome is that? You own the month of May. Like, that's when you know you've made it.
Life goals.
Yeah, not the money and the fame. He owns a month. Justin Timberlake.
All right, top 10 wide receivers on the basis of a half point per reception league. Number 1, DeAndre Hopkins. Jason and Mike, you both have him firmly atop your rankings. I've got him at number 2. Last season, 115 receptions, 1,572 yards, 11 touchdowns, 163 targets.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
Oh, and no drops. Zero.
The
Zero
big
drops.
thing for DeAndre Hopkins coming out of 2017 where we had the small sample with him with Deshaun Watson, which when Watson was on the field, DeAndre Hopkins was absolutely dominating. Still had a fantastic season overall, but it was there's no way that DeAndre Hopkins can hold up the type of target share that he was pulling in last year. And I was right.
It went up.
No, it went down. It went down, but it was still well over 30%, which to me now, 2 years in a row, that's where his target share is going to be. The rest of the guys on his crew, like not Didi. Didi's in my head from the intro. Kiki and Will Fuller, these guys just can't stay on the field. Hopkins is a force who can stay healthy, is an elite wide receiver, and he's going to pull in a plus 30% target share. That's why he's number 1 for me.
What I love about him is if you want to give the argument against like a regression in target share or percentage of teams' targets, look to first downs. And he was number 1 in the entire league in first downs. That's the money down. You know that on third down, they're looking to DeAndre Hopkins. Yeah. They're doubling DeAndre Hopkins, and it doesn't matter. 81 first downs for DeAndre Hopkins this past year. Been an absolute monster. Look, you really can't argue against DeAndre Hopkins. Everything's there. He's got continuity at the quarterback position. Jason, what's more to say?
Yeah, I mean, every argument that has been anti-Hopkins from the past has now been debunked. You know, his first-year breakout, was that really going to happen after he, collapsed the next year under bad quarterback play? Well, no, it was real. His breakout was real. 4 years ago he was the number 4 wide receiver. Then he regressed. Then he was the number 1 wide receiver in all of football. But, you didn't know, does the rapport with, Deshaun Watson, does it stick around? Is he really going to be hyper-targeted? Yeah, no, he is.
Yep.
Well, is he going to be good with Will Fuller out there? Well, he's got a higher split rate with Will Fuller. There's literally, the last 2 years he averages the 1.5 wide receiver in fantasy. He is dominant. He should.
He averages the 1.5?
He averages the 1.5. So if he's not first, he's second. That's the last 2 years. I don't know how you can take. Look, Andy, your number 1 wide receiver.
Correct.
That we'll talk about in just a second. I am so excited for. But I would not, and I think he might even have the higher ceiling. But there's just no world, barring injury, where DeAndre Hopkins isn't so hyper, unfathomably targeted and equaling that with talent to say he's as safe as it comes.
Yeah, I do think that it is a little bit arbitrary at the top. My number 1 guy is our number 3 consensus. So we'll talk about him in a second.
And to the point of that I was saying that Hopkins will always be on the field, he's missed 1 game in his entire career.
So the durability factor is not in question.
Don't you put that on him, Mike.
He's fine. He's a beast.
Is he on the Madden cover?
Oh.
This guy's never missed a field goal before. Great.
What are you doing, the Collinsworth jinx over there?
Number 2, it's actually Davante Adams, our consensus number 2 wide receiver. Jason and Mike have him at number 2. You guys are just identical so far. I've got him at 3.
Jason, you're brilliant.
Thank you.
You guys are
so smart.
Look, Davante Adams was the number 1 most consistent wide receiver in fantasy football last year. 111 catches, 1,386 yards, 13 touchdowns, 169 targets. Last year, Davante Adams had the 2nd most touchdowns in football. He also had the 2nd most targets and was tied for targets per game. Those are, at least by way of the touchdown total, those are numbers that could go down a little bit for Davante Adams. From a target share perspective, they did not have anybody else to go to. Adams was dominant, though. No bust games whatsoever. There was no one else with a 100% no bust last year, no bust this year for Davante Adams. So we know that his floor is extremely high. I guess my question to you is that do you think that is there room to rise for Davante Adams, or do you see his numbers regressing from last year? If you had to put money on one direction, which would it be?
If you have to put the money on it, I guess I would take slightly under, but there is absolutely room for him to go up. It's all about Aaron Rodgers to me. Aaron Rodgers sustains high-level fantasy wide receivers as long as someone is capable. And that, if you go back 3 years ago, that was the question about Davante Adams. Is he actually good enough? Well, this shocks people. It shocks us sometimes. Guys actually get better once they get into the league. That's not who they are at the end of their career. Davante Adams was somebody who actually rose to the occasion. He became a number 1. And as long as Aaron Rodgers is there, Davante Adams is going to be consistent, like you said, 100% of the time. That's an insane number that Davante Adams always helped your fantasy team last year, and he can come through with monster games. And if someone actually emerges for Aaron Rodgers as a wide receiver too, that just means that player is going to be a fantasy asset as well. It doesn't take away from Adams. We've seen numerous times when there's actually a second go-to weapon on the Green Bay Packers, they're just all fantasy friendly. It doesn't mean that, like back when it was Jordy. Jordy and Cobb. Jordy's still putting up top 3 numbers, even if Randall Cobb's being great.
Yeah, you don't worry about that. Even a third. James Jones back in that time was putting up double-digit touchdowns, and that's the reason it can grow, because Davante Adams, the last 3 seasons, the only player with more touchdowns than him is Antonio Brown. Davante Adams is as locked and loaded, guaranteed around the end zone. Like we don't usually look at touchdowns as one of those sticky stats. It's not. For most players, that's the least predictable thing. But there are certain players that year in, year out, I get rid of the that factoid of, touchdowns are hard to predict, or they're not the stickiest, because certain players like Antonio Brown with Big Ben and the number one wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers, they are the touchdown scoring wide receiver of the NFL. And Aaron Rodgers had a down year, 25 touchdowns.
We used to have those conversations about Jordy Nelson, though. Even Jordy Nelson in his duration with Aaron Rodgers, it was 15 touchdowns one year, then it was 7, then it was 8, then it was back up to 13, then it was back up to 14. So there can be variation. I don't think those are guaranteed. I'm curious, and I want to transition this into this next conversation. I have Julio Jones at number 1. He's our consensus number 3 wide receiver. Mike, you got him at 3. Jason at 4. You guys finally let go of each other's hands here and went a different direction.
I'm sorry.
But I want to know the argument why you like Davante Adams more than Julio Jones, since you both have him in that boat. Julio Jones, just so you are aware, 113 receptions, 1,677 yards, 8 touchdowns, 170 targets. That's more than DeAndre Hopkins. Monster back half of the year in terms of touchdown scoring. No player in the NFL has had more 20-plus yard receptions since the start of 2016. He is a fourth quarter guy. He is a game-breaking player. He's the only wide receiver in the NFL to have over 1,400 yards in each of the last 5 seasons. So when you talk about floors and what you can guarantee from a position, I look at Julio and I know that maybe enough years has passed to where we don't look at him as a player that can score 13, 14 touchdowns. I still think he can do that. I still think that's a possibility, and you see the second half of the season where he scored in almost every game.
He was Julio touchdown Jones at that point.
He was. So why do we like Julio has a longer history of purely dominating performances. Why do you both like Davante Adams a little bit more than Julio Jones?
Touchdowns.
The reason is the touchdowns. We joke that it's Julio touchdown Jones just because he was finally scoring touchdowns. But it's not just like, the beginning of last year he wasn't a dominant touchdown scorer. If you look at the last 3 seasons, right, the last 3 seasons where Julio's dominated, you take his touchdown total, and you say, you know what? I'm going to double it. I'm going to give you twice as many touchdowns. You'd still have to add one more before he equals what Davante Adams has had over that time. So, yeah, he is much more dominant from a possession, full PPR standpoint. But those touchdowns win in fantasy. And so that's why I'm locked in as a true believer of, I would put my money on double-digit touchdowns barring injury for Davante Adams. I would put my money on not. And I also have a little bit of fear of slight regression for Matt Ryan. There is still a change. I know it's going back to an offensive coordinator that is not just new, but back again, Backstreet Boy style. And, but you look at Matt Ryan's history, really up and down, up and down, up and down. And last year he had a very up year while their running game was injured. If Freeman is back, those are some of the reasons why I love Julio. 8 touchdowns
in his last 9 games. He's done everything he can to convince you this. He can turn over a new leaf and find himself in
those games. But there's just such a long history of Julio only hit the double-digit touchdown mark once, that's ludicrous for a player who has dominated the league for as long as Julio has.
So rather than jump on the bandwagon over the last 8 games, you're going to lean more towards
the last 3 years
for his career.
Yeah. Yes, correct.
He seems like a lock for 1,500 yards, though.
Yes,
I won't disagree there.
Number 4, Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas coming in at number 4.
Yeah, this is Jason. This is your doing.
Jason's got him at 3. I've got him at 5. Mike has him at 6. Last year, he was great. 125 receptions, 1,405 yards, and 9 touchdowns. I think the most impressive stat, if you're and you know it probably if you're a Michael Thomas owner and you've obsessively watched him play, 85% reception percentage last year. He was targeted 147 times. He caught 125 of them.
That's madness.
That's just stupid.
And that's how you lead the league in receptions. One part Drew Brees targeting you 147 times, one part sticky hands. Now, the strange thing about Michael Thomas is that, and maybe it's just me, we can look at the numbers.
It's not just you.
But he just does not have the aura and feeling that he is going to give you monster games consistently. And I think that has to do with this stat. lowest depth of target, 7.6.
Which
of
goes,
all those upper echelon guys. That's 7th lowest in the league of qualified players, 7.6 yards per target.
Yeah, and that goes hand in hand with his high percentage rate, right? They're
high catch rate.
Yes,
yeah.
his high catch rate. I mean, and
He
Drew
busted
Brees
in a quarter of his games, too.
Him and Drew Brees are so locked in together. The reason I have him so high is simply a standpoint of, he comes into the league, year one as a rookie, and rookies don't usually break out at the wide receiver position. He was the number 7 guy in fantasy football. He's been in the top half of the wide receiver ones the last 2 years. He's just as consistent as they come. I love good offenses. I don't fear a regression for Sean Payton and Drew Brees the way that I do for, say, the Atlanta Falcons needing to throw quite as much as they did. So it's more of a safety risk mitigation. He is not as dominant as Julio can be. He is not as dominant as Davante Adams. But he is one of those guys that I think he has his consistency, and the idea of him just really disappearing, it's not going to happen.
But for consistency, I mean, you can go through our top 10 here, and last year there's only one player who busted more than 20% of the games, and he was up at 25. 1 out of every 4 games, you were mad that Michael Thomas was in your fantasy lineup.
That sounds like, oh my gosh, 1 out of 4, 25% bust rate. It's really high.
That's
actually, it's not. It's not very high. It's very average for the top 24 wide receivers.
Top
He's not
24.
Even in. Yeah, right.
We're talking top 5 guys right now.
And you're also only looking at that year. If you look at that same statistic over the last 3 years, he's among the leaders. So I mean, I'm not worried about the few games that is, especially at the beginning of last year.
Is there a chance he gets – I mean, Mike, is there a chance you're feeling the burn over from weeks 12 on where he had like 4 bust games and 6 games? If you were a fantasy owner that had Michael Thomas at the end of the year, you probably didn't win a title, or you had to fight through his performances instead of winning because of him over the last few weeks. I mean, 5.8 points in week 12, 6.5 points in week 13. Here's one of the reasons that I hesitate about Michael Thomas over a guy like Julio Jones. I think Sean Payton, Drew Brees, that offense, they're fine winning however they want to win. They're fine. If they could find 2 or 3 more wide receivers, value guys in free agency, draft a player, and they could use them to win the game, I don't think they need Michael Thomas to bear the load that Atlanta needs Julio Jones to bear.
And I just think that the rise that Michael Thomas had throughout his career, I mean, in 3rd year in, that was the best year of his career, over 1,400 yards. I think that the way they use Michael Thomas in the offense as not really the field stretcher. I mean, they have the guys that do that for him. He's kind of in the middle of that, in the middle of a possession receiver and a field stretcher. I just think we're capped out where Michael Thomas will be for fantasy, unless somehow the 9 touchdowns jumps up to 13, 14. That would be, to me, how he would jump up into the top 3.
All right, turning over to Odell Beckham Jr. coming in at number 5. Mike and I have him at 4. Jason, you got him at 6. Look, Beckham is we could talk about Odell Beckham Jr. for a long time, but he's a strange one to look at for a number of reasons. 1, he's been banged up, had the injured season. 2, he's changing teams. I mean, you got a new quarterback, new home. You're heading to Ohio. And, look, we know how great of a player he is. We know what he does on the field. Will it translate to the same type of performances with Baker Mayfield in Cleveland? I mean, we projected certain things for Jarvis Landry that didn't come to fruition last year. And not everybody was on the bullish Jarvis Landry side. But we did look and say, man, he had such a target share in Miami. Now he goes to Cleveland. It's just going to be really difficult to have all the stars aligned, the quarterback and the offensive game plan and the offensive coordinator, and the way that everybody up and down the coaching staff feels about a player can change things.
Yeah, I have Odell Beckham at number 4, and I'm having a very hard time with personal bias because I got Beckham at 4. Like, he's changing teams, which is a really big deal, and I'm it's hard for me to not write it off because I think that Baker is a great quarterback. Odell's going to be fine. He'll be the number one guy, even though there's tons of weapons there. Meanwhile, I've got Antonio Brown. I'm like, why am I worried about Brown? Because he's changing teams. That's why I'm worried about Antonio Brown, which does not make sense. So I need Jason. You seem to be the most level-headed about Odell Beckham here. Talk me off of my Cleveland Browns Express.
So you're saying why you're still super high, and I get it.
I love Odell, even though he's changing teams, but I hate Antonio Brown because not hate, but I've moved him down because he's changing teams.
But the difference is one is upgrading their quarterback, one is downgrading their quarterback. At this point in the career, Odell Beckham, I believe Eli Manning is inferior to Baker Mayfield. So he is, I know, crazy, insane thought.
That's when the voice of public opinion would jump in if there was one.
But the Derek Carr.
Hey, this is Dave Gettleman over here. I could have traded Eli for Baker. I turned it down.
Yeah.
I shut it down.
So you know that it was
is that
a
what
bad
Dave Gettleman sounds?
Sounds a lot like Donald Trump all of a sudden.
Dave Gettleman. My bad.
We got all the best quarterbacks.
But the reason I have, I think Odell Beckham Jr.
I'll make him raspy next time.
Well, he's younger than Brown. That would be another reason.
He is
far younger.
Odell Beckham Jr. is, in my opinion, the best pure wide receiver. I think he is number one, absolutely dominant, and in which case, team doesn't matter, quarterback doesn't matter as much because you can give him a little slant route and he'll juke a guy and take it to the house.
Third most broken tackles, by the way, at the position since 2016.
Exactly, and that's what's missing a lot of games. That's what I'm talking about.
You know who number one is, by the way?
Is it Antonio Brown?
By a lot. No, it's not Antonio Brown.
Is it Tyreek Hill?
There's nobody in our top 10 or top 20.
Oh, Golden Tate.
Golden Tate,
yeah,
by
Makes
a wide
sense.
margin.
A lot of screens.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm lowest on Odell Beckham at number 6 is because the target volume as the complete and utter dominant one that he had for New York, we don't know. We don't know coming over here, but from what we saw last year in the small sample that we have with Freddie Kitchens, with the weapons that Cleveland had, Baker spreads the ball around. Baker's going to throw to who's open. He's not trying to make sure David Njoku dominates or that Jarvis Landry is the number one guy. And he's not. I don't think he's going to do that with Odell Beckham. Now, Odell Beckham will lead in targets, and he'll make the most of them. He's on a better offense. So if he finishes as the number one wide receiver, awesome. I think you could see that happening, but I believe he will have a total reduction in his targets, which just hurts fantasy value. And because of the changeover and the fact that he's not just the clear number, I mean, there are a lot. Jarvis Landry, Njoku, even
Chubb, Duke Johnson.
Yeah, Duke Johnson, Callaway.
Does Odell Beckham have an injury problem?
And that's the other issue is, I mean, he's played 1 year making it 16 games. He had a 15 in there, but I mean, he's going into his 6th season.
What do you think about his injuries, Andy?
Yeah, I think he gets a little bit banged up. Right. And I think that at the end of the day, he's Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, if you want, I know we got to take a quick break, but the next guy we're going to talk about, there was a lot of hesitation last offseason with transitioning quarterbacks.
Yes.
And that's a similar situation to Beckham, and it kind of worked out for the whiteout.
Before we move on to that player, I want to thank today's sponsor, SeatGeek. The ticket industry has not changed in a long time. A bunch of big companies, they've been around forever. They don't really care about making the experience easier for the customer. SeatGeek showed up, and they got more than 50,000.
They got to business.
Yeah, 50,000 plus 5-star reviews in the App Store. SeatGeek is focused on making your experience as easy as possible. They pull millions of tickets from all over the web, rates each deal on a scale of 1 to 10. Even Jason can figure that one out. It displays them on an interactive seat map, so it's simple to find what you're looking for. Green dots are good. Red dots are bad.
Oh,
they're overpriced.
I made a mistake.
You grab the red.
I grabbed the red
you
one.
You go for all the red. You like those red dots. With SeatGeek, they're helping you out. We've all got it installed on the phone. We've all had those last-second purchases of, hey, you know what? I got a free night. I'm going to go to the game.
Yep.
SeatGeek, beep, bop, boop. I'm getting tickets. They're making it easy. And right now our listeners can get $10 off their first SeatGeek purchase when you use the promo code BALLERS. You can use that for concert tickets, sports, comedy, whatever you want. SeatGeek supports our show. Go support them. Remember that promo code is BALLERS. $10 off your first purchase.
Can I just speak real quick on
beep bop boop?
No, on the red dots.
Yes.
Mr. and Mrs. Dots, if you're out there listening, put out a box of just the red ones. Wait,
are we talking about Dots candy?
Yes.
Not Red Hots?
No.
Do you like Red Hots?
They're all right. They're a little spicy for me.
I feel like they don't exist other than Halloween. Like, is that when Red Hots exist?
But I don't want yellow dots.
I feel like Dots could vanish from the world right now.
and you'd be fine.
And 95% of the population would not care at all.
Well, count me among the 5.
I just had we had a family trip up to the zoo.
Dots!
Had to drive about an hour
Did
and
you
a
bring
half.
some dots?
And I'm a road trip eater. You know, I need to be eating in the car. I got some of those Sour Patch Kids.
Yeah, there you go.
And I didn't eat
a decent person.
And I didn't eat a single yellow one. Just left them in the bag.
What is wrong with the yellow candy?
Because they're trash.
Really?
Yeah. No, you generally, if it's not banana, then the yellow version of candy
Nobody
is
wants
trash.
to eat lemon candy.
I do.
You do?
Yes.
And you won't eat lemon cookies.
No.
What is wrong with you?
Because a lemon is supposed to be sour. A lemon is not supposed to be sweet.
Oh, gosh. You never had lemonade?
I have, and I like it sour. Like my takes.
Like your face.
Don't put sugar in it. Did you put sugar in this lemonade? Take it out.
Yeah, you make lemonade, right? You cut
Like
the
your
lemon
face?
in half and squeeze.
Is that what you said, like his face?
Oh.
He's got a sour
What are you, low-key insult over there?
pucker face. All right, listen. Beep, bop, boop. Tyreek Hill.
Aye.
We talked all about all these different regression markers for possible downsides to Tyreek Hill transitioning from Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes, and maybe it's not the template for every player, but it sure went well for Tyreek Hill. He was fantasy's #1 wideout last year. 12 touchdowns, 1,479 yards. He runs the football, 22 carries on the season, 87 receptions. When he went off, you won your week.
This is really just about, right now at this time of the year,
a different conversation.
It's one of those, like, we don't know what's going on with, the NFL is going to wait until the investigation is done, and then so there's risk right now. If that was gone and he's exonerated and he didn't have anything to do with it, and he's playing 16 games,
Where is he then?
5 might be too low. I mean, I would certainly look at taking him in the top 3. I would right now
I'd rather have Tyreek Hill than Michael Thomas.
Yes,
if
for sure.
I knew Tyreek was going to play.
I do as well.
And look, he's the definition of a game breaker. I mean, 27 20-plus yard plays last season. That's the most in the league. That means you're getting basically twice a game he's catching the ball and has a chance to turn on the Jets. 11 yards per target, the actual opposite of Michael Thomas. That's the best in the NFL.
The argument against Tyreek Hill as a player has always been he caught too many of his touchdowns from long distance. That's not repeatable.
He didn't score in the red. He did not score in the red zone 2 years ago
because he did not need to.
Yeah, he doesn't.
And that's the thing with him. You just
He's going to take a knee on the one to start pumping up those stats.
Yeah, I mean, no player in the NFL is as fast. Speed-wise, in pads, he just I said this the other day. I feel like defenders, when Tyreek Hill gets the ball and you're the defender that's like, you're up, go get him. I want their inner monologue.
Oh, man.
Their inner monologue would be like, oh, crap.
I would instantly grab the hamstring.
Oh, yeah.
Like as soon as we're lined up, the snap goes off.
I want to see one of those
I lay down.
40-yard dashes with Jason, but where they give him the like.
Oh, they superimpose him over.
No. I want the multi-second head start for Jay. Like I want to know how many yards Jason could go.
I am 5 yards away from the 40,
and he would
when
still,
he starts, and I'm like, I got this, guys.
That would just be very, very fun to see.
Brooks is highlighting his consistency rank because he was tied for 15th, and
that's what you get. You are going to get that with Tyreek.
Yeah, you know what you're going to get
every once in a while,
and that's why you just make sure your wide receiver 2 is nice and safe.
He was limping for half the year.
Now I've talked about
and
this.
And he still put up 12 touchdowns.
I've talked about this in previous years, but based on a lot of work that we've done in spreadsheets behind the scenes, I truly do believe, and honestly, this speaks to myself as something to remember because it's against my ranking of Michael Thomas, and I might need to adjust this. But the value of high-end wide receivers, when you're going to be drafting a wide receiver early, you want the big explosive games more than the consistency. That is, like, I remember making a note to myself 2 years ago That's something I wanted to remember, because you can find later in the draft off of waivers, very easy to get a consistent weekly output from the wide receiver you choose to start that isn't going to just, completely vanish. It is not easy to find wide receivers who can just have monster win it for you games. So early in the draft, you need to be focusing on players who can, Tyreek Hill.
And I guess before we move on, it is worth reminding people what's going on with Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
Right now, there's simply reports of him being named on a police report regarding a case with a child, potential child abuse. We don't know his involvement. We don't know what the investigation will bear out. All we know is that Tyreek Hill has a pre-NFL history with domestic abuse, and anything that deals with abuse of a child, anything that deals with having a history before the NFL, puts you at greater risk of more severe punishment in the NFL. And obviously, we want justice to be had in whatever case is taking place, whether that bears out on Tyreek Hill or not. But we have to talk about the fantasy implications either direction. And right now, people are trying to unload Tyreek Hill. People are looking at it as an opportunity to buy Tyreek Hill.
And I don't blame either side. I mean, the pendulum from a fantasy perspective is Tyreek could never play another game in the NFL for the rest of his career. It's not. It's that far. It's if it comes out in the negative, and he's guilty of that along with his previous history, I don't see another team giving him a chance.
On the Tyreek Hill as a fantasy force side, listen to this. He scored 3 times the fantasy points than the top wide receiver for the 49ers and the top wide receiver for the Redskins. So your wide receiver 1, if I said before the season, Jason, you can have 3 Josh Doxsons or 1 Tyreek Hill, you would have been losing the Josh Doxson side of that.
I probably would have taken the Tyreek Hill.
Before last year, though, you wouldn't have.
I don't know.
Number 7 on our consensus top 10 wide receivers.
Yes.
We already brought up, Mike, you brought up Kiki introed the show.
Yes.
We talked about
Didi.
No, I'm sorry, Didi introed the show.
Oh, you finished off our Mario song.
Kiki was in the middle, and then now we've got JuJu.
Kiki Didi JuJu.
So,
Didi JuJu.
so we're at the JuJu portion.
How has that joke managed to have
survive?
legs on this show?
Because it's the music from possibly the best game of all time.
I throw out hundreds of
Horrible.
horrifically
I want to
bad
be clear.
jokes.
Yeah, the chicken tender one on the last show, not good.
I apologize for nothing.
We know.
But somehow Kiki Didi JuJu? That's
Kiki
the
Didi
one?
JuJu.
It's just catchy, Mike. Bad jokes that are catchy are at least
All right,
catchy.
I'll make them poppy.
Yeah, you got to make yours rhyme at least.
Can we all agree that JuJu at number 7, which is where I personally have him ranked, can we all agree it's way too low?
No.
Way too low.
Well, where does he belong?
Number 1, baby.
Yeah, it's perfect timing to talk about JuJu because this Antonio Brown, JuJu Smith-Schuster,
man, what is
Twitter
going
snafu.
on?
Look, the question that I have, let me just drill down JuJu for you. 166 targets last year, 4th most in football. 89 yards a game, 7th most in football. The 5th most yards in the league. I just want to know what the outcomes are for JuJu. He was the wide receiver 9 last year. We have him at 7, 7, and 8. Do you see those numbers, which were at the upper top, the high end part of the league? Do you see them staying the same, or do you see them with opportunity to grow? Because my only concern about JuJu is that you've seen this breakout season. I love the player. He's super young. He's great. Big Ben's nearing the end of his career. No more Antonio Brown to take coverage away. I think we've talked about it on the show quite a bit. But I just wonder how tapped he is. I wonder if 7, 8 is right where he's going to finish.
Well,
I think we might have just got it right at 7.
It's all about the touchdowns because the receptions, the yardage, it is there. But you give JuJu 3 more touchdowns. So now he's just at double digits. And now he's sitting right around the wide receiver 5. And that's not talking about you're giving him Antonio Brown levels of touchdowns where it's 13 plus, because then he's easily in the top 4, probably in the top 3. So Jason, I lean more with Jason's side of it's possible we have him too low.
Do you think he leads the league in targets?
Yeah, I think he's going – if he's not a league leader, he's going to be top 3 because, look, I know part of it is Antonio Brown, right? Antonio Brown's so good. He's demanded the targets. He's just an unbelievable talent. But the other part of it is Big Ben – he gets a rapport, and he's going to hyper-target him. If you look at the last 6 years, this is no small sample, Antonio Brown has averaged a 16-game pace of 178 targets. That's gone.
Right.
And you've got a clear number one rapport in JuJu with him. So, yeah, I mean, JuJu will be if he doesn't lead the targets, the NFL in targets, he's going to be top 3, and his talent alone, I realize he has not had the coverage that Antonio Brown
That's a big
has
question.
ever received. I realize that he's in the slot
They also threw more than anybody.
What's that?
They threw more than anybody in football.
Right. And
last season. So
and
they transition a little bit to, more of a James Conner focus?
I think they're going to be balanced enough, but I mean, the last 6 years was the data I was just using. That wasn't just from this one single season of throwing the ball more.
And in the last 6 years, also to your point, Jason, Antonio Brown has only scored fewer than 10 touchdowns once. That was 2 years ago, but he only played in 14 games.
Do you look at it the same breath that you would Aaron Rodgers with Green Bay, where that number one guy is going to end up in the double-digit category just because of how much they throw, how much Big Ben throws?
Yeah.
I lean that way.
So the range of outcomes for JuJu, could he finish the year as the number one overall wide receiver?
100%.
Yes.
He is.
I'm not going to put him close to there, but yes, he could.
He is so talented. Last year,
Would you call him a star?
A star has been born for sure. I wanted to make him a my guy, but there was so much statistical things that said it's going to be really tough for him to actually succeed next to Antonio Brown.
I think you've taken enough credit, though, as if he was your guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because he was.
Like
I talked him up everywhere.
You like to bring up that he was going to be your guy so many times that he basically is your guy, and then you get credit.
How many times have I brought, guys, I was so close. Patrick Mahomes was almost my guy last year. I was so close.
But there's a difference between when I actually love a player and you just making something up.
That's true.
I think that's going to be the big
tomato.
difference.
Antonio Brown, you get your moment here. Number 8. So we've all got him. Well, I don't.
You have him.
I have him flip-flop with JuJu. Antonio Brown, we have him as our consensus number 8 wide receiver for 2019. Last year, 15 touchdowns, led the NFL, 168 targets, 1,297 yards. Double-digit touchdowns in 4 of the last 5 seasons. I think that we all agree on a few principal points with Antonio Brown. Number 1, I don't think any of us believe that he's done by way of age, he's too old. Number 2, I think we all agree his season may come down to one person only, Derek Carr. Or whoever plays quarterback for Oakland.
Down to that, yes.
Just comes down to can Derek Carr or whomever plays quarterback do enough to stretch the field with Antonio Brown to make up for any time? Do we expect 15 touchdowns in Oakland? I think none of us do.
No, certainly not.
That would be more than half of Derek Carr's total touchdowns that he throws next year. If he had, that's the way that I see it. I don't think Derek Carr's going to throw enough. I've got him currently statted out for 28 touchdowns.
What's his career high? 22?
I believe it's 32.
Oh, 32? The year before, 2016?
Right, his MVP season. So, maybe he throws 33, 34, and has his best year. He certainly has his best core of wide receivers he's ever had. But this is, you have to keep in mind, this is a team, if you look at the offensive coordinator mixed with Gruden, they do want to still establish the run and be a run-first team. We'll have to see what they do in the draft. Obviously, they signed Crowell. There's still room for other running backs. I just don't see – he's not going to get the same targets that he's had. He's not going to get 178 16-game pace target. I don't see that happening in Oakland.
Mike, what is the worst-case scenario stats-wise this season for Antonio Brown? Last year, 104 receptions, 1,300 yards. It was 1,297, 15 touchdowns. What's his worst-case scenario?
Worst case is low-end wide receiver 1. I don't think Antonio Brown can fall out of the top 12 as much as I'm crapping on Derek Carr. right now. I mean, Carr in 2016, he did enough to sustain 2 wide receiver ones with Michael Crabtree and Amari Cooper. So we'll see, because if things that year, let's say that things bend a little bit more in the favor of Crabtree than they do for Cooper. I mean, he's pushing at that wide receiver 7 range at that point, which is right around where we have Antonio Brown. So I feel very confident and comfortable where we have him right now.
All right, it's time for the most underrated player in the top 10. Mike Evans coming in at number 9 on our rankings. I think he's the most underrated. Kyle, our editor-in-chief, asked the question, is he perennially and forever 25 years old? It sure seems that way considering the fact that, he's starting his
6th season.
6th season in the NFL. But last year, in case you weren't paying attention, which was an easy thing to do in Tampa, probably a preferred thing to do, 86 receptions, over 1,500 yards, 8 touchdowns, 138 targets, an absolute physical force, 26 20-plus yard plays. That is 1 fewer than Tyreek Hill, who no one could stop talking about all season long. 17.7 yards per reception, 3rd most in the league. And, guys, 1,500-plus yards. I mean, those aren't numbers to sneeze at.
No. It was the most yardage of his career. But since he came in 2014, he has never failed to surpass 1,000 yards. 1,000-plus yards in 5 straight seasons to start his career. I mean, that's at the tops. I mean, that's elite.
He finished at wide receiver 8 last year, despite the back and forth between Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston. Bruce Arians arrives in Tampa, and for any of his shortcomings, look, he put together great offenses in Arizona.
That's excuse me. That's what I was going to bring up. Do you think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense is better, just overall, more points scored, more yards on the year with Bruce Arians than with Dirk Cutter? Dirk Cutter was an offensive coach. Because I'm in agreement with you, Mike, and I'm curious. Do you think, Andy?
I do.
So, I mean, this is a step forward, I believe, for an NFL offense taking on Bruce Arians. And if that's the case, this is why I'm so bullish over Chris Godwin. I love Mike Evans. I love O.J. Howard. It's kind of – I see the whole Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense taking a step forward this year.
He has a little bit lower of a floor than a guy like Julio, because Julio is going to put up 100-plus receptions, whereas I think Mike Evans is probably firmly going to be in that 80 to 90 range. That's where he caps out. So, in other words, you've got to turn the touchdown dial for Mike Evans.
Yes, you do.
If you turn that dial up, he's a top 5 guy. If you turn it down a little bit, the lack of PPR capability for him is probably going to pull him down into that 10, 11, 12 range.
And yards after catch. I mean,
right. That's not his forte.
Well, because he's put into bad situations, I believe. I mean, I don't think that he is missing the talent to do it, but the way that Jameis throws him the ball, it's
got a lot of 20-yard down the field jump balls.
Yes, and I'm getting tackled immediately.
Yeah.
So I think he is one of the best values out of these names that we've brought up, and really we're not telling you anything too surprising today on the show. We're revealing rankings, but I don't think that you don't know
what's
that
crazy
Antonio Brown or JuJu is good
about this, because I agree with you that we do seem to underrate Mike Evans talking as the general public. Would you be happy and confident at this point, you're in a draft, Mike Evans is your wide receiver 1?
Oh, yeah. I would feel fine.
Yeah, I see the point you're making, because
I
feel like I'd be okay.
I'd be
all right, but I'm not excited.
Exactly.
I'm like, okay.
As long as Julio's my wide receiver 2, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's the nice thing about Mike Evans, right? Mike Evans won't be going in the first round of your draft, so he won't be your number 1 pick. Hopefully you grabbed a stud to make it worth it. But that's why he's going to be a value, is because nobody is excited about him. The guys that you're not excited about who are still really, really good, those are good for fantasy football.
Well, and that's a good thing to identify as a fantasy owner, as a commissioner in your draft, is look for guys that, played on a team that struggled. I mean, there's going to be opportunity. David Johnson, this article that just came out on our website from Lauren Carpenter, David Johnson at least provides the potential value of a top 5 pick at a better draft position because Arizona was abhorrent. They were difficult to look at. Tampa struggled. They bounced around quarterbacks. You could easily ignore the strong end of the season that Mike Evans put up. Week 16, 18 points. Week 17, 25.6 points. Those 2 games, oftentimes people don't see them because those guys aren't on championship teams. T.Y. Hilton rounds out the top 10. I have him at 10. Jason and Mike at 11. Last year he was banged up, fought through it to end the season. Kind of surprising in the games he played, he only busted 7% of the time. That's kind of been the MO for Hilton, is that he's had kind of the up and down situation. But Andrew Luck returned with a vengeance, 1,270 yards, 6 touchdowns, 120 targets, 76 receptions. This despite missing 3 games and being banged up for a number of them. Highest catch rate percentage of his career, highest yards per game of his career. Ask the same question that you just asked with Mike Evans. Would you be comfortable walking into the season with T.Y. Hilton as your number 1?
No. I don't believe I would. I like T.Y. Hilton. I mean, he's a wide receiver 1 in my rankings, but if you look back, I love what Frank Reich is doing for the Colts as a team, as an offense. He's clearly Andrew Luck's 1. So you could be fine, but you're not excited because you look back at T.Y. Hilton's history and you go, okay, he's been in the league a long time. He's had Andrew Luck for a long time, and you've only had really 3 years ago when he finished as the wide receiver number 5.
Yeah, but 2 years ago he didn't have Andrew Luck.
Sure, he was bad then, but the year before that when he had him and Andrew Luck was there, he finishes the wide receiver 21. 11 the year before, 14 this past year, granted in 14 games. It's just one of those things where I look at him as a back-end 1 or a really, really high-end 2, but I don't see him as the target hog that I want as my wide receiver 1 that I'm confident is going to finish
Will you
as a top 10 guy.
While we talk about him, Jay, will you pull up the splits and tell me what he finished from weeks 10 on as a wide receiver? I'm just curious because obviously those first couple games of the year, he was actually okay. Got injured for 3 of 5 games, but Andrew Luck was kind of figuring things out downfield. I'm curious what he was from weeks 10 on. I'm not sure it's very high. It might be kind of right around where we have him ranked, but I am kind of curious.
Number 5.
Okay, so he's the number 5. That's kind of what I was wondering is once we saw him with Andrew Luck and Andrew Luck was comfortable, he was back, he was doing what he was trying to do. I mean, that's a pretty good sample size from weeks 10 on.
Yeah, I mean, but you also
and I think
have to keep
that's
in
his
mind.
ceiling. I think wide receiver 5 is in the cards for
I
T.Y. Hilton.
think that is his ceiling, but you have to keep in mind they were dealing with a lot of injuries. They had no number 2 whatsoever. Doyle was gone, and they had a rotation of a couple different guys.
Do they have a number 2 now?
I like to hear him say that they had no number 2.
Well, I mean, Eric Ebron was
you
pretty
realize
good.
you just besmirched Eric Ebron.
No, Eric Ebron is not a number 2 wide receiver. Yes, I apologize,
Number 2
Eric
option.
Ebron.
Number 2
you
option.
are not a good enough wide receiver 2 in mine or Mike's
Called
eyes.
him a turd. I heard it.
I have never done no such thing. I stood by him when he was a turd.
Number 1, DeAndre Hopkins. Number 2, Davante Adams. Number 3, Julio Jones.
You just called
Yes,
him
I
a
did.
turd.
You shut your mouth. You shut your mouth. Edit that out. It's never happened.
Just remember, there was a time. Number 4, Michael Thomas. Number 5, Odell Beckham Jr. Number 6, Tyreek Hill. JuJu Smith-Schuster at number 7. Antonio Brown at 8. Mike Evans 9. T.Y. Hilton 10. And we will cover numbers 11 through as many as we can get through on Thursday's show. I think we have time for a couple mailbag questions.
What?
Mailbag.
All right, if you have a question for the show, thefantasyfootballers.com. You can send in your question. Click the Submit a Question button. You can even dial our voicemail hotline, 302-464-TFFB. And we're going to jump into a voicemail question right now.
Hey, ballers, it's Devin calling from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Bonjour. I have a keeper question for you guys. I have 2 keepers. I'm going to keep Nick Chubb for a 15th, obviously, and then I need to decide between James Conner for an 8th or George Kittle for an 8th. Half-point PPR. Originally thinking Conner, but I'm worried about the Pittsburgh offense next year. Thanks a bunch. Love the show.
That's a good question. For me, it's Connor going away.
Yep.
You have to look at a selection like that where you give up the same value. You're giving up an eighth in either situation, and just ask yourself, where can you draft those guys? You're going to end up drafting James Conner higher than you would George Kittle. So if you want George Kittle and you want to overspend on him, you still have the better value in James Conner.
Yeah, you could take Kittle for a 3 or something like that if you want to.
Do you agree?
Disagree?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It would be Connor for sure.
Ballers, Ty from Georgia. Question, what do I do with Sammy Watkins? Is it a good idea to target the Tyreek Hill owner in this ambiguity of his off-field situation? Yeah, that's my question. Also, Brooks is the man.
What? Oh, Brooks. I see how this question got on here.
And now people know how to get their questions on
You
the
have
show.
just set up a terrible example
Somebody
for the
needs-
listeners.
Well, Brooks's brother, let's answer your question.
This is a really interesting question to me about Sammy Watkins. I was in this boat in our Dynasty League. I think the only problem that you have when you target the Tyreek Hill owner is you're probably not going to get the kind of value you would want when you target him as kind of like an insurance policy. Like, it's hard for somebody who has Tyreek Hill to go pay you big money for an insurance policy on their guy. They're already feeling vulnerable. They probably don't want to give, everything away, because guess what happens? If Tyreek Hill plays, now they got Tyreek and Sammy Watkins. So, yeah, I think that you want to find somebody that, like I did, wants to try to, strike it rich on the lottery ticket of Sammy Watkins. His value is as high as it's going to be right now because of the rumor.
What is the actual upside, though? Like, Sammy Watkins is now the one.
Yes, this is great, because I was talking about this with Jason, and this is perfect because you weren't here, and I said I believe that Sammy Watkins has leveled down from possible outcomes of his career. Like, when he came in, he's been riding the coattails of the high draft capital forever. Hasn't come to fruition. At some point, you level down your future ceiling. I don't think he has a top 12 type of ceiling anymore.
I think he could be in the top 12, but my point was, like, he doesn't get to Cookie Monster and gobble up all of Tyreek Hill's stats. He doesn't turn into that player. He's a completely different type of guy, but you still have Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback, and he's theoretically the number one wide receiver on the team.
If Tyreek Hill was gone, and I know that I am a Sammy Watkins believer, I don't believe he's leveled down at all. In fact, if you look at his numbers last year on a per-game basis, they're way better than you think they were. He was a wide receiver 2 on a per-game basis, and that was, as he was injured, it was on target for almost 100. His pace was nearly 100 targets, and that was in year 1 in that new system. Now he's coming into year 2. If Tyreek wasn't there, I don't see how Sammy Watkins isn't a wide receiver 1.
Well, because he's hurt. He'll get hurt.
Oh, okay.
And look,
sure.
and look, I feel like we've been making.
We could do that with Odell Beckham.
Sure, but not to the extent of Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins had every opportunity to become prolific with Sean McVay. Sammy Watkins had opportunities to stay healthy in Buffalo. Sammy Watkins had opportunities last year to be a premier wide receiver with Patrick Mahomes and got hurt. I feel like we've seen it, like we've been around the block enough times, like the vinyl is scratched. Even the best song on the album isn't
skipping.
It's not a top 10 guy anymore. And obviously I am coming from a different perspective. I traded him away because of that conviction. Look, you're making Pat Mahomes his number one guy. I'm not sure what that means still, because I don't think Andy Reid looks at. Do you think that the Kansas City Chiefs they say, well, we're fine. Tyreek Hill's gone. We're fine with Sammy stepping into that role.
No, they got to have somebody, but that wouldn't take away from Sammy Watkins still being the number one read in the offense. But I mean, him and Travis Kelce.
Unless it was a Hollywood.
I was going to say they'll draft somebody, no doubt.
Hollywood.
Jason is calling for Hollywood Brown to end up on the Chiefs.
I'm calling for Hollywood Brown to end up on the Bucs and ruin his Chris Godwin.
No, don't do that to me, man.
All right, one more question. Isaiah in Indiana. Even though
it's a very important question.
What does he say? Even though it is not likely, I just need to hear someone discuss the possibility of Pat Shurmur drafting his son Kyle Shurmur to play QB in this draft.
I think it is not likely. You are welcome, Isaiah in Indiana.
Like I said, I got Eli.
But you heard it here.
Is that voice better?
It was a little bit better, yeah.
It's me, Dave.
You're working. You're going to be working out this
working
Gettleman all year long.
Yeah, well, I'll get it by about halfway through the season.
Okay.
Hey, it's me, Dave Gettleman.
Hello, hello, it's me.
Hey.
No, you're Stallone.
This is a Stallone voice. This is Dave Gettleman.
Hey, it's me, Dave. Dave Gettleman.
That's right. David Gettleman.
Oh, that's a good one.
David Gettleman's here. You want to make a trade? I never even looked at trading back.
Wait, now he's a big oil tycoon. What happened there? We're not very good at voices.
No, we're not.
Have any of you even recently listened to David Gettleman?
No.
I have, actually.
Because he sounds
He's got
like
a
this.
pretty good voice. Hey, guys. Hey, guys. This is me, David Gettleman.
No.
Hit the outro.
Oh, I can't.
All right.
I can't. Oh, let's get a deal on JuJu Smith-Schuster. PristineAuction.com. A signed Pittsburgh Steelers logo football yesterday went for $84.24. That is a JSA authentic autograph from JuJu himself. PristineAuction.com. For Mike, for Jason, I'm Andy. For Dave Gettleman.
For me.
Goodbye.
One of these days we'll get it.
We'll talk to you on Thursday. Thanks for tuning in, subscribing, and supporting the show.
See you next time.
We appreciate you.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Fantasy Footballers Podcast. Join our fantasy football community on jointhefoot.com and follow us on Twitter @TheFFBallers.